Hello, I'm Suzavile, and today we will be reviewing the Kingdom of Rohan. The Kingdom of Rohan, the mighty horsemen. They begin with a medium number of settlements, which include Edras and Hornburg, of course, which will be the main producing facilities. In terms of enemies nearby, Isengard and Dunland and the clans of Inidwaith will be your western enemies, but you also have to contend with the forces on the north of Dol Amroth and of course the Shadow of Mordor. In terms of objectives, they are of medium difficulty, only 40 regions, and it includes all the lands that they already have, plus Gilead. You have to eliminate the factions of Shadow of Mordor and Dominion of Isengard. Of course, Dominion of Isengard will be fairly easy since it's so close to us, but Shadow of Mordor will provide a most dangerous foe and a very difficult position. Of course, you can have several paths to victory, which is, in my opinion, the best thing about Rohan. You can always pursue west and take out the Enedwaith clans and Dunlet, and that will create a few extra settlements for your war against Mordor. You can also go into the north and defeat Dol Guldur before proceeding into Mordor. All of these options are fairly good. In terms of diplomacy, you start only with 2 allies and only with 1 enemy, the Dunlands, although Isengard will quickly follow you. In terms of units, Rohan has quite an interesting roster due to their heavy cavalry compositions and also weak militia. Their militia are not really that good considering their neighbors Gondor, for instance, but they do have a few specialized units such as the Riddermark X-Men, very good against cavalry and effective against armor as well. Although you will mostly be relying on your powerful cavalry, and in that you do have mostly all the cavalry types. You have skirmishers, you have medium cavalry, heavy lancers, you also have medium and heavy missile cavalry. Rohan, therefore, has a lack of anti-armor but plenty of anti-cavalry, some medium archers and some strong late-game army. That is mostly due because of all the cavalry forces. They have only 1 elite unit of anti-armor on those Riddermark Axemen that I've showed you earlier, and they have no problems at all versus enemy cavalry. They lack stakes, which is actually beneficial. In terms of upkeep, the horsemen are quite expensive. They will cost a lot in the long run, but of course you can take a lot from them as well. You can use them very effectively both in the early and in the late game. They have a very nice rate of replenishment in terms of their cavalry units, mostly with 5 turns, 7, so you will field many powerful armies, and that is also good because cavalry tends to be exhausted from so many charges, of course. In terms of the compositions on their armies, the initial army I would go with what I call a Turkish approach, which is heavy on the militia side and the horse archers, and for the elite army, more of a Mongol approach, which is heavy archers and heavy horsemen banded together. A general plus 7 to 8 units of cavalry is not a bad idea, and also, of course, some militia units to storm into some fortresses or cities. In terms of buildings, Rohan has some good synergies. They will have the use of the tourney field and, of course, the Horse Breeders Guild as soon as you can, because you will be recruiting a lot of cavalry. In terms of the best cities, you will have Edras and the Hornburg, and of course you'll have access to Isengard should you conquer it in the beginning. Then, in terms of finances, they are fairly good. No problems in the finances in the beginning, and they have very good buildings for profit. Most of your cities are still undeveloped, so there is plenty of profit to be made. It is very rewarding both in early and late game buildings. They provide units, and they are not fairly expensive. Castles have better cavalry, as I can show you here. Irate heavy lances and irate horse archers attained at the castle level. Even on the small settlements, of course, as you can see. Cities have, although, better archers, but they require a minor city. Let me show you right there. Yeah, on the minor city, that's the only time that you will be able to recruit some Helmingas. So, of course, you will need some good minor cities, and especially specialize those cities into the practice range and archery range. Agents for Rohan will be fairly important. Lots of them, both on the west, on the east, and on the north. Diplomats are actually key. Consider this. In terms of your diplomacy, you only have one enemy so far, so you will need at least 3 diplomats to go in all directions. We'll go through the west, we'll go into the north, and of course into Mordor. This also provides several different paths to victory and a lot of diplomatic options. In terms of spies, you will always have 2 perfect spots for your spies. You have access to this port, which provides some knowledge on this area, but of course holding a spy near Minas Tirith to check on Gondor and holding a spy on these crossings to check on Dol Guldur will always be a necessity. In terms of assassins, of course they are very useful, I would say, especially because you're using cavalry armies, and in terms of hammer and anvil, armies with no general will fall very easily to your own forces. In terms of overview and resuming the faction of Rohan, their strong points, of course, their cavalry, their finances, their early game, and their castle production, which will prove very useful during the game. Their weak points, they can be hard countered, of course. Most of their forces are cavalry, so beware of stakes and heavy anti-cavalry units. They start fairly surrounded, so that is also one of their weakest points. And after Isengard, many questions will arrive. Where to go next, of course. Generals, they have a good general on King Theoden and several decent medium generals, so you'll have plenty of choices there. Most of them are very good when using cavalry, so be sure to use them as well. You have no night fighters on any of these generals, so night battles will be harder, of course. They have very good building and unit synergy. Of course, if you use the armor, your militia units will be much more favorable. So it's actually one of the factions that you can use the armor to its most effectiveness. In terms of rush options, they are of course, very good because Isengard lies right there and it's immediately an easy faction to take. But in terms of teching options, it will be very hard to do. Of course, Dol Amroth will attack you very soon, and Mordor as well. And that is not to mention just the tribes on the west over here. Overall, they have a very interesting position, a very interesting army, and interesting choices on the paths that you shall take to victory. Certainly a faction to play more than once, I would say. Cheers and goodbye.